Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Joel the naturopath, and I really just want to share with you guys the topic of kids' health and how kids' health really matters. I know for myself, I have two littlies hanging off me most of the time, and they bring a lot of joy and a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun when they're well, not so fun when they're not so well. So I really want to talk about how we can keep our kids as healthy as possible, and in doing that, everybody else in the family stays healthy too. So to understand kids' health, we need to understand something called the gut-brain axis, or the gut-brain immune axis. And really that is just understanding the complex network of communication that happens between the gut, the immune system, and the brain, and how this really regulates our response to our diet, our lifestyle, and the environment for which we live. When this gut-brain immune becomes affected, we get a whole host of symptoms going on with our children. So it can be anything from cranky pants, mood problems, fluctuations, highs and lows, can't concentrate properly at school, memory issues even at that age. They can feel like they've got a bit of a dull headache, or they just look a bit dulled out. Digestive issues, obviously behavioral issues, which are all the things that are very, very common in a lot of our children today. So really, I'm wanting to try and get you guys to understand the importance of this gut-brain immune axis and what really impacts it the most. For example, a young child's brain has something we all have called the blood-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier is a filter which takes up nutrients and oxygen and all the good things, and it tries to do away with the stuff it doesn't want to uptake, which is toxins from normal metabolism or from our environment, etc. Now with a young child, that blood-brain barrier that filter is not really fully intact, which means it still has a certain level of things pass through it. Which means that it's just sort of looking at that angle where a child's rather vulnerable to their environment. So, if we look in terms of, that aspect of a child's gut, the gut health is very much still somewhat leaky, as they refer to, which is where the gut lining becomes or is quite permeable to uptake in nutrition, but also it can uptake a lot of waste products as well. And that uptake of that means that the liver has to deal with more of that load. So, our children are just basically little sponges to that. And we need to obviously do the best we can to try and help them through that process and minimize that exposure as much as we can. What contributes ultimately to this GBI becoming imbalanced is really looking at poor diet. Kids come in now to see me, and I look at their blood and do various things. It shows, that toxins are having a burden on their system. And part of that is because they're nutrient deficient and they're nutrient depleted. And we need nutrients in order to allow our systems and organs to detoxify properly. So the other is obviously typically, they come in with a diet that's just completely off the scale with sugar. And it may even be that the sugar is coming from fruit, where they're having, 5, 6, 7 pieces of fruit a day, which is just way too much fruit. Yes, there's nutrition in fruit, but eating like a fruit bat is not necessarily the way that nature really intended for our children. When we have too much sugar, whether that sugar is coming from refined sugars, cakes, biscuits, sweets, etc., or whether it's coming from fruit, it still influences not only our blood sugar, which causes that highs and lows through the day with our energy, but it can also really affect the gut microbiome and the level of good versus bad bacteria that are present in there. And essentially the bad bacteria produce a certain level of toxicity in its own right, and therefore their poor little systems and their livers have to deal with that load again in order to basically try and clear it so it's not influencing their immunity in their brain. Diets that are high in additives and artificial flavors and colors. You know, we've already seen in plenty of research and just in our own children, you know, you give them some red frogs, for example, you know, as they're going to be flying off the walls within probably half an hour. I mean, the proof's in the pudding with that. The more we can move away from that stuff, the better our kids are going to function. Diets where there's, you know, possible food sensitivities, food allergies are a true thing in today, given that, you know, our food has changed so much in how it's made, how it's produced, how it's manufactured. Kids don't have that digestive capacity to break that stuff down very well. So it's very common to see gluten sensitivity or wheat sensitivity or dairy sensitivity, and invariably mums and dads will notice a big difference in their children just by giving their kids removal from that for a week or 2 or 3. Heavy metal exposure is a massive contributing factor to this gut-brain immune imbalance as well, especially from that immunological and brain neurological component. Really can suppress immune activity, so it gives them more colds and flus and that sort of immune-based stuff, but also neurologically in terms of behavior and mood and the concentration becoming heavily affected there. So again, it's really about trying to help lower the load for what they're exposed to in this day and age. So really out of this, I just want to give you a few little tips, and the tips are whole food, plant-based diet, fruit and veg. What I'm going to say is broccoli is fantastic for the liver because it helps produce something in the liver called glutathione. And glutathione, without it, we'd be dead, basically. And it's a very powerful antioxidant. And it goes into the cell and it fully detoxifies the cell to really help that with kids and improve their focus and attention and things like that by helping to support glutathione production in the liver. Eating organic and spray-free as best you possibly can. I know there's a lot of controversy with that, but believe you me, I don't really want to subject my kids to pesticides, insecticides, herbicides that are synthetic. It's just another thing for the liver and the gut to have to deal with. Try your best to not let your kids overeat. You know, we're seeing obesity in children now. It's 60% of the population in Australia. The kids are basically obese. And so we want them to eat essentially till they feel satisfied. If they haven't eaten much and they're not hungry, well, I wouldn't push it because their innate intelligence tells us that they're not hungry. If they're refusing but they're still hungry to eat their vegetables, and you know, then that's a different story. Do your best with that. The other is looking at fluids. Trying not to let your child drink fluids with their meals is a real key player too, because we want acid in the stomach to digest food. We don't want to and get all the nutrients from that. We don't want to try and wash it down and dilute that acid too much with water, because it just won't work as well in terms of it'll be improper breakdown of nutrition. Try and ensure too that we've got a good filtered water rather than just straight from the tap. We already know there's plenty of chemicals and nasties and things like that in there. So again, lessening the exposure and the overall load. And lastly, I just want to share about what I typically see with children through looking at their live blood microscopy or dry blood microscopy is the level of protein is generally a bit lower, or in some a lot lower. And that's generally because when kids get a taste for sugar or carbohydrates, that's all that they want: bread, pasta, rice, and refined sugars. So they kind of miss out a bit on the protein angle. And you know, when we're talking proteins, we're talking meats, we're talking fish, we're talking chicken, preferably we're going hormone-free, organic where possible, again to lower that load. But nuts and seeds and legumes, peas, beans, lentils, they're all a good protein source. So really making sure that your child is eating that on a day-to-day basis is also a key part to this. And protein's very important for the liver in terms of producing glutathione. And if your kid goes to a nut-free school, then try and get them to eat nuts after school or before school, whether it's in their breakfast or what. Plenty of nutrition, minerals, vitamins, all that stuff that comes from nuts. That way they're just not having empty calories essentially out of a box. So I hope that gives you some insight. It's a lot of information, but I hope you managed to get through the video. And any issues or information you want from me, email me at info@joelthenaturopath.com.